My name is John Hughes, John Henry Hughes. I was born in South Milwaukee on August 20th, 1931. I was baptized in South Milwaukee soon after I was born by a man named Russell Harding, Father Russell Harding. He was a Canadian who at that time was the pastor of St. Mark's, South Milwaukee. I remember him well. Turns out that in my first 10 years of life, I contracted pneumonia twice and then scarlet fever, which was really the scourge of diseases at that time. And plus all of the childhood diseases, measles, mumps, chicken pox. Pneumonia was no picnic then, and it put me into the old county hospital, now Frater, twice, and that is for each stint of pneumonia. But then along came scarlet fever, and I had to be out of school. I was about 10 years old at that time, and I had to be out of school for about 6 months. I didn't go to the hospital for some reason, but I was at home being cared for by my mom, and it gave me heart valve damage. You hear about that even today, heart valve issues, but somehow I survived it. Our family moved into Milwaukee, the north side, because my father had just taken a job at a plant there during World War II, 1941. That was kind of hard to take. We were South Milwaukeeans, and it was a difficult thing for us to make the move, to go to different schools. It was kind of a scary time because all of our friends we had no connection with. We never had a family car. So it wasn't easy to travel back and forth. So when we left Milwaukee, South Milwaukee, and moved to the north side of Milwaukee, it was just a whole new world for us. Fortunately, we were only 3 blocks away from St. George's Church, and also from the grade school that I went to, 12th Street School on 12th and Center, and eventually across the street, North Division High School. But St. George's at that time, this was just the beginning of World War II, the priest we had was Father Waddington. He had been kicked out of the Philippines. He was a missionary in the Philippines, but the Japanese sent him home. He and his family came back, and he was at St. George's for several years. Until the end of the war, he went right back to the Philippines. I mean, that was his work, that's what he wanted to do. He was a wonderful man, had quite a family, several children, and he and his wife, the children, I believe, were all born in the Philippines. So they looked forward to going back again after the war. There was a man named Father McEwen, who I think he was a Wisconsin native, but he was our pastor for a number of years after Father Waddington went back. And I'm not sure Father McEwen was so much the inspiration for the Scouts, but there was a man, I still remember him, Mr. Haltner. He had a big family there, and he had been in Scouts and was a Scout master. So we had quite an active troop there at St. George's in Milwaukee. The troop at St. George's at that time was designated Troop 140. We had several patrols, and I was in the Wolf Patrol. But scouting was really big in the diocese at that time. In fact, I'm trying to think, at Camp Webb, which was in Neshota, was a great gathering place in the summer for all the troops around the diocese. And so scouting activity was a lot of fun, and it was kind of a teaching tool. There were so many youth groups, as I remember. The names are a little fuzzy at this point, but Young Adults Group was the name given at one point. Young People's Fellowship was another name, and each parish seemed to have its own group. And then there was kind of a master diocesan-wide series of activities for all those groups to get together. And it seemed wonderful to meet other young people in the church. And that was great from a dating standpoint. And and each of these groups seemed to have its own identity, special for that particular parish. And then when we got together, for instance, one of the series of activities that we had was at De Koven, the great place that was something of a university at that time in the Racine-Kenosha area. And every year we would have a week-long gathering, which was both social and informational, educational, and where we had an opportunity to meet people, other Episcopal people, young people there, people from all the parishes in the diocese. That was a wonderful activity, just so life-affirming, you might say, an opportunity to see more broadly the church and hope to have a lifelong experience in the church and not just stop after you leave school. Work out beautifully. The people that I met who were part of the parish at St. George's had such a wonderful impact on me and my empire. It made me a real ultimate churchman, and probably was the result of me staying in the faith my entire life. This all was the result of my father having died in 1943 of tuberculosis. And at that time we were plunged into becoming a welfare family. And my mom would say things like, you know, you kids aren't going on to school. My two sisters, my brother and I, why don't you think about going into the military? Brilliant of her. Fantastic. Turned out to be the greatest thing. She said, go in the military, and that way you'll get the GI Bill. My big sister, near the end of World War II, joined the Navy. My little sister just got married. She didn't go in the military. My little brother joined the Army. I joined the Air Force. I joined in April of 1950. It wasn't until June of 1950 that the war in Korea began. So lucky me, I got to become a radar specialist in the Air Force in the South. And then eventually I was shipped to the Far East for 18 months. And as something of a minor radar equipment specialist. I would have, if I had been in the Army like my brother, I'd have ended up in Korea. But I was a part of a group of people who flew out of Japan. That was much more comfortable than being in a foxhole in Korea. There are 4 big islands, Kyushu, Honshu, I forgot the other one, and then Hokkaido. Of these 4 big islands that make up Japan, Hokkaido was the northernmost. It turns out at the time, just like today, I suppose the Russians were not necessarily our enemy, but always suspect. And so we had several radar installations, search radar, to watch the movement of their shipping and aircraft. So I was up there for a while, and I was at a city called Rumoy. There were a couple of more northern cities, but from where we were, I was just looking at a picture. A buddy of mine asked, do you have any pictures when you're there? I am standing atop of what they call the Quonset hut, doing some maintenance on this big search radar antenna that would swivel around it. So that brought back memories. And our search radar tracked our own planes and shipping, but also the Russians, because they were on the island just above Hokkaido. It was something they won in World War II. They were on our side fighting the Japanese. We ended up being allies of Japan and still are. It's amazing how something like that works out, where they become one of our best allies. But so we were watching what the Russians were doing and could see that from our search radar. That was one of my assignments. I had some others too with Japanese Coast Guard. They had a lot of American equipment on board their boats, but they weren't really good at maintaining them, and so I had a special assignment from time to time to work on the equipment on their boats. They were our allies, and so it worked out very interestingly. I have many, many pictures, my color slides, of me standing out with the pastor of one of those churches in the area of Rumoy, where I was stationed, and another one down in a city called Misawa. It was like the Church of Japan. I can't remember the official title, but they were in communion with the Episcopal Church. I came home and lived with my mother for a time, and was back an acolyte once again at St. Mark's, South Milwaukee. And then I went to work at a plant, a big company. It was called Line Material Company, or McGraw-Edison at the time. And my father had worked at the big Cyrus Erie plant out there in South Milwaukee, which is now Caterpillar. That's kind of equipment, road building equipment. And but when they were already had phased out a lot of their operations, and so I went to the outfit that did a lot of electrical work. That was my specialty, Line Material Company, and I worked there for quite a time until I was taking courses at Marquette by that time on the GI Bill. But eventually I got a chance to go full time so I could get my degree. And so I moved then to downtown Milwaukee, right off of the Marquette campus. And that's when I began going to church at St. James on the Avenue, and stayed there until I finally graduated from Marquette in 1968. So it was quite a stretch of time. I graduated from high school, North Division, 1949. I finally graduated from Marquette, bachelor's degree, in 1968. Of course, a lot had happened during those 19 years. I continued taking courses at because of the GI Bill. Never paid a nickel for it. My mom was so correct. And I was able to amass a total of 322 credits at Marquette over a long period of time. Night school, day school, and more night school for about 15 years afterward. I was never able to parlay that into a master's. You had to be in an assigned program, and with a major chosen to do that. I just kept taking a variety of courses. Math was my essential major throughout. Eventually, after I graduated, I found that it was quite easy to get a job having a degree in 1968, and the fact that the Vietnam War was just heating up and involving U.S. troops. It turns out I had also just turned 36 in that year, and that took me out of the running for being recalled by the military. They weren't recalling anyone over the age of 35, thank heaven. So I didn't have to go back in the military and into the Far East. So, and I was so sought after, a young man with a degree who didn't have to go into the military as Vietnam War was heating up. So the world was my banana, I guess. I was really lucky. And so I was able to go to work at a company not far removed from the Marquette campus. It was on 8th and Michigan. The building still stands there. It was called Milwaukee Insurance. And I was immediately hired as a commercial lines underwriter, but involving lots of numbers work. And I continued until I retired from there on my 65th birthday. And I was still downtown. It wasn't that long a trip here, but I thought, gee, I really should. I was living in a rooming house at the time near the campus. So I thought, gee, I'm making money now. Why don't I get myself an apartment? So I did. And the apartment was in this block, right on the corner of Knapp and Marshall. And I thought, so I started immediately coming to church here, and I eventually just transferred over here. It was the job that caused me to come over here to the cathedral, but it was wonderful, and I've been here ever since. A number of other people who had been at St. James with me also came over here, about a half a dozen of them. Sadly, they're all gone now. And that was 40 years ago, and they were already people in their 30s and 40s. So sad. I have had motorcycles for about 50 years, many of them different sizes and types. Always loved the sport, enjoyed it so much. But as I got older, especially when I turned 90, a number of people began to think, you shouldn't be riding that motorcycle in the traffic. My driver's license includes the cycling stamp, that is, I'm legal to ride them. But finally, at the urging of family members, I decided to start thinking about it. And this past winter, when I only rode a few times when the roads were dry and it was well above freezing, I finally agreed to do that. And so I sold it to a fellow in my building, and I still see it because it's parked where it was before, but Earl owns it. And it broke my heart, and I thought, should I just decide to go back and buy another? And I thought, probably not a good idea. However, I've kept my bicycle, and I was just out on it yesterday and the day before. I wanted to get some biking in before the snow. But just one of my favorite sports. I'm so glad I can still do it now that I'm in my 90s. For some reason, it is still the same church that I grew up in. It's the same words, the same thoughts come to mind. it's probably the most stable part of my life because it's unchanging, and the faith still means so much to me. Nothing has happened in the church to change how I feel about the need for it. It just seems to make so much sense. This seems to be the kind of life to lead, knowing or feeling as I do that it still makes sense. There's nothing fake about it. There must be a figure that caused life to happen in the first place. I don't think it's just a happenstance of biology. And the life, the guidance that the church offers to people, it just makes so much sense to me. I've never doubted it. And nothing has happened in history to change my feeling about the need for recognizing religion. Grace is something that miraculously comes to you if you let it. And what seems to be keeping me going in the belief that there is an Almighty, there is a God, is the life that I've been able to live all of these years by staying attached to the church. And it's grace that seems to give me life, continue to give me life, and living the sort of life that I should, as guided by the church. That must be, that would be what I look at as grace. I've been given the grace to continue to live, and practicing this religion seems to be an important part of it. Maybe just that I am so thankful and pleased that I've been allowed to be on the planet this long, and there is still a practicing religion going on, something that appeals to me so much. It's so affirming for the religion itself. If in fact there are still buildings like this, there are still people worshiping, saying these same words, I think it means it was a good thing to do, and it still applies. Here I find this late in life, religion lives, Jesus lives. This is still makes some kind of sense. Yeah, very comforting.
Pretty good.
All right, I take off the helmet.
Sure. You got a cool racing hat.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.